My name is Carmel Thomson, and I am an educational psychologist. And it still feels really surreal saying that out loud and knowing that I'm telling the truth. I am an educational psychologist. I started my proper adult job in September 2018. And the weekend before my first day, I was out with a close friend who'd also recently started her job as an EP. And she asked me, she said, Carmel, what are you going to wear to work? And I thought this was a really bizarre question because, in amongst worrying about all the skills and the knowledge required to do the job itself, I hadn't really considered what outfit I'd be sporting whilst doing it. So I looked myself up and down and was kind of like, I'll wear whatever. Now, my friend seemed really surprised by this, so we talked about it further, and it turns out that prior to her starting her job, she went on a shopping spree for professional attire. She shared that as a young woman in a serious role, she already feels self conscious walking into meetings with important people. She feels as though people might see that she's young and a woman, and that might influence what they expect from her, as in they might expect less or not take her so seriously. I couldn't relate to any of this, and I wondered, is this just me, not being self aware? Should I be thinking about all this stuff before starting my job? Is this my friend's polite way of telling me that my personal style does not give off a good first impression? And how far do we take it? Is it just the clothes I need to consider, or should I be looking for a more professional looking bag? Oh my goodness. Is my Hakuna Matata notebook too childish for work? And a little bit later, it was the night before my first day, and I asked my husband, I said, Liam, what should I wear to work tomorrow? And he looked really confused, probably wondering why on earth I would seek outfit advice from him. So he responded almost nervously with, clothes. And it dawned on me in that moment that the reason I had not spent any time worrying about my work wardrobe was because, to put it bluntly, I'm really used to people having low expectations of me. In fact, I expect people to have low expectations of me. I'd go as far to say there have been times in my life where I've almost thrived off it. When I was in school, I was the only kid experienced kid in my class. I also didn't have any friends out of school who kid experienced, and it wasn't really something that we talked about when I was younger. And I felt different. I felt different to other children my age. We weren't taught about anything beyond the nuclear family. The nuclear family being this idea that children live at home with their mum and their dad, often a brother and sister or both, maybe even a pet. And that was what was normal. Anything outside of that was different to the norm. Now, I have this really vivid memory of an experience in early primary. My gran used to wait in the playground watching proudly as I skipped towards the school building, and upon reaching the entranceway, I would turn around towards my gran and we would smile and wave at each other. It's a really sweet example of the wonderful attachment that I formed with my gran in the aftermath of being placed in kinship care. One day, however, I forgot to turn around and wave and smile, and I was well into the school building by the time I remembered, and immediately I felt trapped by the chaos of all the other kids running towards their classrooms. Instinctively, I ran to my classroom, racing towards the window that overlooked the playground, but my gran was no longer there, and I broke down. My sudden hysteria must have startled my teacher, who, without contextualising my heightened emotional reaction, might have just thought it was an innocent portrayal of overdependence, or an indication that I was just having a bad day. My teacher tried to comfort me, repeating over and over that my gran would be back to see me at the end of the school day, but I didn't believe her. All I could think about was how awful it would be if something happened to her and she never came back, and the last time she saw me was when I forgot to wave and smile. I felt different for as long as I can remember. On a practical level, from the age of 3, I didn't live at home with my parents and instead was placed in kinship care. For my entire school experience, I did my absolute best to avoid any conversation about family because I was worried that people would think differently of me if they knew I was in care. I was ashamed of who I was. I would have done anything to change my early experiences and be part of a normal family. As members of the care experience population, the system itself can feel like it confines and dictates so much of what you're capable of. The statistics evidencing the predicted poorer outcomes and the research demonstrating the impact of early trauma, it can all feel like this dark cloud hanging over you. For children growing up in care and for care experienced adults trying to make something of themselves, it can be so difficult to overlook the expectations of others, the societal barriers, the scientific limitations. It can feel easier, most of the time, to just accept your predetermined fate. I left school as soon as I could and I got myself a job working in Claire's accessories. And it's a strange one because I loved learning, but the formal setting of school didn't suit me. I spent the next little while going through the motions. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't happy. I wasn't achieving or progressing. I certainly wasn't realising my potential. I remember arriving at work late one morning and getting a bollocking from my manager. And there were these mirrors mounted on all the walls in the shop, and as my manager was shouting at me, I was looking at myself in the eye and thinking, I don't care. And I realised then that the attitude I had in school wasn't confined to that setting. It was my attitude. And I'd taken it with me beyond the school gates, and if I didn't do something to change it, it would ruin me. So I went back to education to try and make something of myself, and within a year, I dropped out. Eventually, I did move on from Claire's accessories though, and I got a job working in a college. My role was offering support and guidance and helping people stay on track with their learning. And there was this young girl who'd grown up in care, who the lecturers wanted to withdraw because her attendance was so poor. I took the opportunity to chat with her one day and she told me about her life. She shared her story, and I felt so privileged to hear it and I was in awe. She had so much going on. So I asked her, I said, why are you in college? With everything she had going on, she was trying to reconnect with her birth mum. Her partner had recently had a bereavement. She'd been declared homeless. Her mind was just so busy with so many things that a bit of me thought maybe, just maybe now is not the right time for you to be starting an educational journey. Just like I'd felt like it hadn't been the right time for me in the past. And then she told me the story of the elephants. In Thailand, when baby elephants get brought into the circus to be trained, they're tied up with rope to fences. And when they're young, they try to break free. They try and try and try again, but they're not big enough. They're not strong enough. And when they get older, you see these huge elephants tied by these small ropes to these small fences from which they could quite easily break free, but they don't even try because they've been conditioned to believe that if they do, they will fail. This young girl had spent most of her life believing that she would fail at everything she tried because that is what she was conditioned to believe. That is what those around her expected from her. School is not for you. Education is not for you. You'll be the type of girl that does X, Y, and Z, but she refused to accept that. And honestly, it was through her courage and stubbornness that I found my strength. It took time, but eventually I graduated with an honours degree in psychology. I chose psychology as a subject because I wanted to better understand myself. When I enrolled for my undergrad, I didn't have a clear vision for the future. And it was during my second year of study that an educational psychologist delivered a lecture talking about her role and reflecting on key psychological theories that really resonated with me, including attachment theory and ecological theory. She spoke of the power of learning in improving future health and happiness. She highlighted the impact of life experiences resulting in barriers to accessing education. She spoke of her experience as an individual who believes everyone has the capacity to learn and grow and be the best they can be. She described her role as being that of someone who supports our most vulnerable to access learning and realise their potential in life. And as she spoke for the first time in my life, I reflected on my potential to do something meaningful and to make a difference. I was going to be an educational psychologist. To become a chartered educational psychologist, you're required to complete an undergrad in psychology followed by a master's degree in educational psychology. The master's programme is comprised of both teaching and placement, and you learn about the core functions of the role, which include consultation, assessment, training, intervention, and research. For your final year of training, you're contracted to a psychological service and you complete your qualification in educational psychology, which requires you to write up and submit pieces of work evidencing your competence across functions of the role. As an educational psychologist, I work to promote the well-being and educational outcomes of children and young people across nursery, primary and secondary school settings who experience barriers to learning. These barriers may be a result of complex learning and health difficulties and/or complex life circumstances. Working with care experienced learners is a priority and a privilege. Despite advances in research evidencing the neurological, biological and psychological impact of early life experiences going some way to improve how professionals support our most vulnerable children and young people, I continue to find myself increasingly frustrated by the lack of equality and equity. I am confident that education can be the way out of a cycle of turmoil and disadvantage. Education changed my life. It doesn't look the same for everyone. It might not take an academic focus or be about qualifications. but supporting children to develop their sense of self, to understand and manage their emotions, and to foster appropriate and emotionally supportive relationships is critical. It is through education that we find ourselves. What do you want to be when you're older? I think most people can recall being asked that question at some point or another. I always remember stating that I wanted to be happy. For me, growing up, happiness was something that existed moment to moment. It wasn't a long-term investment because who knew what the future would hold? I was never one to get too excited about things because I would quickly become overwhelmed with anxiety about everything that might go wrong. I lived in the moment and for the moment, and this made me spontaneous and fun, but also very unlikely to see anything through. Pursuing a career in educational psychology was the first long-term investment I made, and when I started my master's, I wasn't just happy in the moment, I was excited about the future. Over the last couple of years, I've met with lots of potential educational psychology trainees who typically ask me how hard it is to become an EP. They focus mainly on the practical aspects, the assignments, the thesis, the expectations on placement. All of that takes hard work. You have to commit your time and effort, do lots of reading about lots of different things and hustle. But underpinning all of that, you have to believe you can do it. Imposter syndrome. That's the bit that I found challenging, and I'm sure the same will be said by many people from underrepresented groups such as the care experience community. On the day I graduated with a master's degree in educational psychology, I thought about that young girl and the elephants. I also thought about my late gran. At that point, I'd been fueled with the confidence and strength to acknowledge the difficulties of my past. I'd accepted that yes, as a child I felt different. I was different. I grew up in care, and statistically that means I belong to a deprived minority. I'd also accepted that different is beautiful. As I stood on the stage that day and accepted my scroll, I looked out into the audience and gave a wave and a smile. Part of me was hoping to catch eyes with my wonderfully supportive husband in the crowd. The other part was for my gran. Diversity and inclusion are integral to my profession. Our primary goal as educational psychologists is to promote diversity and inclusion, and we know we're still a far way away when we must continue to talk about it so much. But it's not about eradicating difference and treating everyone the same. It's about recognising that some people need different supports to be successful. The need for support doesn't define your ability to be successful. My name is Carmel Jacob Thomson, and I am an educational psychologist. I had to work exceptionally hard to say that. I came closer to quitting than most, and I needed lots of help and encouragement along the way. But the experiences that made my journey so challenging are what makes me good at what I do. I walk into meetings wearing the clothes I feel comfortable in, and I wave and smile confidently at the other professionals at the table because I have earned my seat. And the life experiences that reduced my chances of getting here provide me with invaluable insight as we work to facilitate a scenario where the future objectives of children and young people in Scotland are not defined by their early life experiences. Now, if ensuring that children and young people with additional and complex needs are supported to realise their potential is something that you feel passionate about, I highly recommend a career in educational psychology.